The year is 1275. A king stands at the window of a palace in Seville, watching men argue below him in three languages, Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, over instruments made of brass and silver. Outside, the sun is exactly where it should be at this hour, and the king is furious, because according to every table he's commissioned, every calculation his scholars have produced, it isn't. His name is Alfonso X, King of Castile, Leon, and Galicia, the most educated monarch in Europe. A man who wrote poetry, composed music, reformed the law, and built observatories. And right now, he is convinced that the world itself is running late. But what you don't know, what the history books almost never mention, is that he was right. And understanding why he was right is going to cost him his kingdom, his son's loyalty, and the last years of his life. To understand how we got here, you need to go back to a catastrophe that had been quietly building for over 1,000 years. Julius Caesar's calendar was a masterpiece of its age, and it was wrong. Not obviously, not dramatically, not at first. But the Julian calendar, the one that organized the entire medieval world, was off by 11 minutes and 14 seconds per year. Every single year, it fell just slightly short of the actual journey the Earth takes around the sun. For a century, 11 minutes is nothing. For 5 centuries, it's noticeable. For 1,000 years, it's a crisis. By the 1200s, the Christian calendar had drifted nearly 9 full days away from reality. Easter, the most sacred date in the Christian year, was being celebrated in the wrong season. The spring equinox, which determined Easter's date, had slipped backward nearly 2 weeks from where the Council of Nicaea had fixed it in 325 AD. This was not merely inconvenient. This was theologically catastrophic. The Church taught that celebrating holy days on the wrong date was not an error. It was a sin. And nobody could fix it. Oh, they tried. Scholars petitioned popes. Brilliant men proposed reforms, some accurate, some laughable, all ignored. Because fixing the calendar meant admitting that the entire Christian world had been sinning for centuries. No pope wanted to sign that letter. So the days kept drifting. And the Church kept looking the other way. Until Alfonso. Alfonso was born in 1221, son of Ferdinand III, the warrior king who drove the Moors from Seville. Ferdinand won territory with a sword. Alfonso was going to win something else entirely. He grew up in Castile, a kingdom sitting at the collision point of 3 civilizations. Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus, was just to the south. And for centuries, that border had been the most intellectually fertile place in the Western world. Muslim scholars had preserved Aristotle, Ptolemy, Euclid, while most of Europe was still largely illiterate. Jewish scholars served as translators and physicians to both Muslim and Christian courts. In the city of Toledo, you could walk 3 blocks and hear Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin, all spoken at once. Alfonso didn't just observe this world. He built his reign around it. When he became king in 1252, he did not celebrate with a tournament or a feast. He called a meeting of scholars. He wanted to fix time. What Alfonso commissioned is called the Alfonsine Tables. If that sounds dry, here's what it actually was. The most ambitious scientific project in the medieval world, designed to calculate the precise movement of every planet, every star, and the self. To map the heavens so accurately that any scholar, anywhere in the world, could look up the position of any celestial body on any date, past, present, or future, and be right. He hired 50 scholars. Then more, Jewish astronomers like Isaac ben Sid, known as Rabikag, and Judah ben Moses Cohen, Christian clerics trained in mathematics, scholars who had mastered the Arabic astronomical tradition. He paid them enormous salaries from the royal treasury and set them up in Toledo with the finest instruments money could buy. Brass astrolabes, armillary spheres, water clocks of extraordinary precision, mercury-filled timing devices that measured intervals by the drip of liquid metal through calibrated channels. His clockmakers were not trying to slow the sun through magic. They were doing something far more audacious, measuring it so precisely that humanity could finally correct for its drift, pinning down the length of the solar year to a fraction of a second, so the calendar could be fixed once and for all. And they worked. For 20 years, they worked. The Alfonsine Tables were completed around 1272. They calculated the length of the tropical year, the true solar year, with an accuracy that wouldn't be significantly improved upon for 3 more centuries. But Alfonso's kingdom was not grateful that it was broke. 20 years of salaries for 50 scholars. 20 years of brass and silver instruments. 20 years of travel, translation, correspondence, revision. And Alfonso hadn't just spent the treasury on astronomy. He'd commissioned hundreds of manuscripts on law, music, history, poetry. He'd built monuments. He'd fought wars on credit, partly financed by selling promises he couldn't keep. His nobles were furious, the church was suspicious, and his own family was sharpening knives. Here is where the story should resolve. The great king finishes his life's work. The tables are complete. Surely now, surely, he can rest. But it gets worse. In 1275, Alfonso's eldest son Fernando died suddenly, leaving 2 young grandsons as potential heirs, and a second son named Sancho, who believed the throne should be his. The nobles who had never loved Alfonso's obsession with stars and scholars saw their opportunity. They backed Sancho. And in 1282, after years of civil war that tore Castile apart, Sancho led a formal revolt. The Cortes, the Parliament of Castile, stripped Alfonso of his powers, not his title. That would have been too clean, too merciful. They left him the throne like a costume, something to wear with no authority behind it. Alfonso was 62 years old, suffering from cancer, confined to Seville while his son ruled his kingdom in everything but name. And now, the second thing the history books almost always skip. In his final years, stripped of power, outlived by his project, Alfonso sat down and wrote one of the most extraordinary documents in medieval literature. Part will, part philosophical testament, part curse. He catalogued everything he had built, the legal codes that reformed Castilian governance, the poetry, the music, the star charts covering every wall. And then, formally, publicly in writing, he cursed his son, a medieval king invoking divine punishment against his own heir. Alfonso died in 1284, in Seville. Technically still king, effectively in exile, his grandsons never restored. His tables, sitting in a manuscript room in Toledo, never truly used in his lifetime. And here is the open question no historian can fully answer. Did Alfonso die believing it was worth it? For decades after Alfonso's death, the Alfonsine Tables circulated slowly through the scholarly world, copied by hand, translated into new languages, passed from monastery to monastery, not celebrated, not famous, just used quietly, by people who needed accurate astronomical data and didn't much care where it came from. In 1320, a Parisian astronomer named John of Mours used the tables to predict a lunar eclipse with greater accuracy than any previous method. Word spread through universities. By 1350, the Alfonsine Tables were the standard astronomical reference across all of Europe. Copernicus used them. Let that land for a moment. Nicolaus Copernicus, the man who would eventually overturn the entire geocentric model of the universe, who would place the sun at the center and shatter the cosmology that Alfonso himself had believed in, built his heliocentric calculations on data that Alfonso's scholars had gathered 200 years earlier. In Copernicus's notebooks, still preserved, references to the Alfonsine Tables appear throughout. And when Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492, the navigational calculations he used to estimate his position, the solar declination tables, the star angle measurements, traced back to the same workshops in Toledo where Alfonso's scholars had once argued in 3 languages over brass instruments in the Castilian sun. But the final chapter, the one that closes the loop, belongs to the calendar itself. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII reformed the Julian calendar, the one that had been silently drifting for over 1,000 years. He dropped 10 days to correct the accumulated error. He adjusted the leap year formula to prevent it from happening again. He fixed it. And the mathematical foundation of that reform, the centuries of accumulated astronomical data it required to calculate exactly how far the calendar had drifted, traced directly back to the Alfonsine Tables, to Alfonso's treasury, to Alfonso's scholars, to those 20 years of arguments in Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew in a workshop that probably smelled like oil and brass and old ink. The king who tried to stop time never stopped it. He measured it more precisely than anyone in his era, and every calendar printed after 1582, every clock synchronized to solar time, every GPS satellite calculating its position by celestial angle, all of it follows a chain of scholarship that Alfonso's obsession forged. He died in exile, stripped of power, cursed by the nobles he'd neglected, outlived by a son he'd damned, and in a palace in Toledo, in a workshop he'd paid for with his kingdom. His clockmakers had already done exactly what he'd asked. They didn't slow the sun. They measured it so precisely that everyone else could finally catch up.